Hi, I'm going to show you how to make this silk ribbon embroidered cuff bracelet. So I've got some very fine muslin here, and this is just to support this silk embroidery ribbon foundation fabric, or surf. It's a canvas for embroidery, and I've got some silk over that, just a piece of silk, any fabric will do. And over that I've just put a piece of tutu netting, and I've kind of sandwiched this all together, just pinned it very lightly. I'm now going to put it into a standard embroidery frame. So I'm going to move the pins now just to the edges of this so that I can work in the middle. So the surf, the silk embroidery ribbon foundation, you can get from craftyattic.com. It's a fairly rigid canvas, and you can embroider on it and then you can cut out around it. It won't fray, and it will support any ribbon embroidery that you want to do. So if you wanted to, for example, cut things out and put them onto a handbag or a pair of shoes, you would be able to do that. So I'm looking at my sewing machine here. I've installed the bouncer foot. I've dropped the top tension right down because we don't want any tension at all on the machine. I've dropped the feed dogs on the machine as well. You'll need to do that however you do that with your machine. And I've just installed some metallic thread here. It doesn't have to be metallic, but I've put that in so that you can see very clearly what I'm doing. I'm just using a contrasting thread on the bottom of the machine. And I'm just now going to just freeform meander the thread, sandwiching these three fabrics together very firmly to make my backing. So once again, we've got a layer of muslin which is holding everything into the frame. We've got some silk embroidery ribbon foundation fabric from craftyattic.com. Then we've got a piece of fabric over the top. In this case it's some maroon coloured silk, and a piece of tutu netting. You can probably skip the tutu netting. I like to use it because it adds just a little bit more rigidity and it keeps everything together. So I'm just going to meander over the whole thing. I've now cut a template which is 21 centimetres long by 6 centimetres wide. If you've got quite a wide wrist, you might want to make that 21 centimetres 22 so that you can get your cuff on. I measured a bracelet that I already have that fits over my wrist quite easily, and it's 21 centimetres, but do check. So I have a cabochon with an empty centre. I've drawn around it to form an oval, and unfortunately I thought I pressed play when I was doing that bit and drawing around the inside of it, and I didn't, so we haven't got video of that bit, but this is what the inside of the cabochon will leave us in terms of space. So I'm now going to do a spider ribbon rose. I've got some 2mm silk embroidery ribbon from Crafty Attic, and I'm doing 5 spokes. I'm just stitching it through with a sharp needle. So this will be a chenille needle which has got a nice fat eye on one end and a very sharp point on the other, making my 5 spokes there. So now I've got some 7mm white silk ribbon, and I'm just using a pair of hair straighteners just to iron it out and make it nice and flat and glossy before I start working with it. And I'm just going to, with another chenille needle, bring the 7mm ribbon up through the centre of this spoke. I'm not going to tie a knot in it because I want the back of this cuff to be completely flat, so no knots in the back of any of these things. I'm just going to leave an inch or so of the ribbon poking down on the other side and do a French knot. So a French knot, for those of you who haven't done one before, you wind the ribbon 3 times around the needle and pass it back down through the fabric again, forming a knot. So again, using the sharp needle, bringing the ribbon back up through the fabric. I've now changed to a blunt needle because I don't want the needle to be caught in the fabric while I'm weaving this spider rose. So I'm just now weaving over, under, over, under. Because there's an odd number of spokes, you will always be going over where you last went under the last time you went round, so it works out to be a very nice rose when you've finished it. So I'm just keeping going now, winding over and under, over and under. So you want to keep going really for as long as you can. You probably want to keep going for a lot longer than you think you can. When you've filled these spokes up, you can always fill a couple more, 2 or 3 more rows in afterwards, so that you fill the rose head completely and you cover up all the ends of the spokes with the petals that you're forming, and you make a nice neat little bud. So that's how you do the ribbon roses. They're very, very simple. You do have to use silk ribbon though, because nothing else will pass through the fabric. So it has to be 100% pure silk. So I'm just going as far as I can with this piece of ribbon, and I'm then going to put a sharp needle back on so that I can then feed the ribbon back through the fabric and tie it off on the other side. So the loose ends of the ribbon, you will either just catch them in with some normal thread, or catch them with the silk ribbon that you sew through. So here's the cabochon that I have with an empty centre. That's how I drew my oval shape to start with. And I'm just going to now leave the rose poking out through the centre of it, and I'm just going to tack the cabochon down onto the fabric, just using some regular machine thread. And the little gap between the top of the rose and the edge of the cabochon, I'm just going to fill in with some little seed beads. I've got some little silver seed beads I think will look quite nice in there. So there's my little silver seed beads. I'm just going to fill up this area. Sewing seed beads on is very, very easy, and it's a lot quicker than it looks. So just stab stitch with a normal thread until that area is filled with the beads. You don't have to use a cabochon here, you can use anything you like. I quite like buying broken brooches and old brooches in charity shops, and they make good centerpieces as well, so you really have flexibility to make this up as you go along. Now I'm going to colour my rose the colour I want, and I'm using a Pro Marker pen. You can order these through the website. There's a special discount code there for customers of craftyattic, so you get free postage and other goodies. There's a slightly different colour pink, slightly darker, and I'm just going to touch the edges of the rose to give a more kind of 3D and natural effect on the colouring. This is why I always use white and then colour afterwards. You get a much better effect. When that's dry, it'll be beautifully subtle. So I've got a black pen here, really just so that you can see where I'm marking these roses. These are going to be more spider roses, made in exactly the same way as we've done the previous one. And so I've put the spokes in now, and some of the spokes actually go into the cabochon because I want the roses to look like they're growing over the edge of that little frame there. And I've got some little chippings, they're amethyst chippings in purple, and I've just sewn them in the gaps there to start filling out the design. I've added some little seed beads, started sewing those on. These are just some little matte seed beads that I found. They're kind of a mixed heather colour, and I'm going to do a mixture of the chippings and the seed beads around this central design. I'm going to add 6 more rose heads now, so in exactly the same way as we did before, doing the silk ribbon in 2mm to form the spokes, and then using the 7mm silk ribbon to form the petals afterwards. So I've done a lot of the work off camera because it's very boring to watch the same thing over and over and over again. So they're all formed now, and I'm just going to use a black pen just to freehand draw a design for leaves and some scrolls onto one side of the cuff. And obviously when I've drawn this on here, I'm going to do exactly the same thing on the other end as well, so that we end up with a symmetrical design. So I'm just drawing on some leaves. It doesn't really matter, you're not going to see any of these pen lines, they're all going to be covered up with embroidery or with the seed beads. So I'm just changing the design a little bit as I go along. I always tend to make things up as I go along, and I think that's the best way to do things really, because you get a much more free looking design when you've finished. If you want to plan ahead, then that's cool too. So that's where I'm going to put the leaves and some of the bead designs, and I'm going to do a little kind of trumpet shape here. So now I'm going to do the leaves in 2mm white silk embroidery ribbon and do French knots. So once again, French knot, you bring the ribbon up through the fabric, you wind it around 3 times and you pass the needle back down through the fabric and pull tight to form a little knot there. If you haven't done French knots before, you can have a practice with some regular thread on a spare piece of fabric until you get the hang of them. The important thing is to hold on to the tail where you pull it tight before you actually pull the ribbon through the fabric. So I've got 3 different colours of green pro marker here. These pens are permanent, so you can colour things, and they do blend so beautifully together, and the silk will just take the amount of ink that the silk wants. So you just really need to touch the pen to the silk and the silk will do all the work for you. So I'm just going to use a slightly different colour in the centre of that leaf and a slightly different colour around the outside. I love using a combination of French knots and beads because it does give you a lovely texture to your finished work. So here you can see that I've finished all of the leaves there, and I've started sewing the beads, little seed beads onto the design, just covering the backing fabric. I'm now going to do the same on the other side of the cuff, and you can see there now I've finished sewing all of the seed beads onto this. I've left about 2mm around the edge of the cuff so that I've got room to stitch and assemble the cuff without the beads getting in the way. So I'm just removing the whole piece of work now. Sorry, my head's in the way. And I'm just carefully cutting around, very carefully cutting around that line that we drew when we drew around the template at the beginning of the project. There is a fair amount of work in this project. I guess it would take you probably a full day and a half to complete, or a few evenings. It's sewing all the little seed beads on takes a reasonable amount of time, but I've really enjoyed doing this project. It's quite small. So there's our finished cuff. You can see what the cuff is now going to look like. So I've just got a normal machine thread, and I'm just going to tack these edges together with just some normal stab stitches to form the cuff. You don't have to worry about these stitches too much, as long as they're in a reasonably similar colour to your backing fabric. You won't see the stitches because we're going to cover the join and seed beads just the way we have with the rest of the project. So here's the cuff finish now. You can see we've got a bit of a gap here, so I'm just going to fill in this gap by sewing in more seed beads and just covering the area with the little beads there. I actually like sewing on seed beads. I find it quite therapeutic. It's a lovely texture when you're finished. So there we are, we're just going to keep going with these little beads here until that whole area is covered in. It'll help to stabilise the join as well. So I've got my original template back and I'm just then going to draw around it with an air erasable pen, and I'm using a piece of felt, the right colour for my project, and just cutting out piece of felt. This is going to line the back of the cuff. So as I said before, you might want to make it slightly longer, this pattern, if you've got slightly larger wrists. So I've just now pushed the felt into the cuff, and I can see how much shorter the lining needs to be than the outer. And I'm just finding out where the join is, and I'm just going to fold it back, make a little crease in it, which I can see when I pull it out, and then just chop it off with my scissors. Felt's a very forgiving material. It doesn't fray, and it stretches a little bit as well. It's very forgiving. My father would have said it has a large wangle factor. So I've got here a milk carton from Yo Valley. Doesn't have to be organic milk, it can be anything. So I've just peeled the plastic label off there, and I'm going to use an old pair of scissors just to cut a large section of plastic out of this milk bottle. These plastic milk bottles are great for these type of projects. You can actually sew through them as well if you need to. We're not going to do that now, but it's a great material. I use it quite a lot, and it's free. So I'm just slicing up through the centre there, and then cutting out the rest of this piece of plastic that I want access to. I can then use my original template to mark roughly how big I need this piece of plastic to be. It does need to be narrower than the original, because you're going to need to stitch at the top and bottom of this cuff to hold everything all together. So I'm going to cut well inside the lines on each side. You probably want to chop off a good sort of 7 or 8 mil from the width as you're cutting this out. Make sure you use an old pair of scissors as well, not your best fabric scissors. We don't want to wreck them. So there's my lining piece. I'm just going to now lay it inside the cuff and find out how much I need to chop off it. So I can see there how much overlap there is, and just chop that off. So this will add some rigidity to the finished item. You want your cuff to be nice and rigid when you're finished. So I'm now going to just close this piece of felt into a cuff shape by using some standard machine thread, and I'm just going to run a blanket stitch along the seam to join these two ends together. So there we've got our centerpiece finished now. So just a few last little stitches, and then clip that thread off. So you can see we've got a nice neat seam there. I'm just going to now put it inside the original cuff. You want to really make sure that all of your joins in all of your different fabrics here and materials are in different places around your cuff, because you don't want your cuff to kind of fold along any sort of line that you've got there. So you can see that we've got the cuff assembled, and we're nearly finished. The last stage is to sew seed beads over the edge of this cuff on the top and the bottom to finish the whole thing off. And this will seal all of your raw edges and make it look like a nice, beautifully finished item. So I've got a double thickness here of machine thread, and I'm just, or 2 strands on the needle, and I'm just picking up 4 seed beads at a time, and just using them to wrap around and over the edge of the cuff here. So I'm going to do a lot of this off camera as well, because nobody wants to watch an hour of me sewing on seed beads. So make sure that your beads are pushed to the front of the cuff there, and they're covering the edge neatly. And there we are, we've finished. You don't have to do this design, you can go wild. This is just an idea of how you can proceed. So all of the materials we've used here, the silk ribbons and the pro markers, you can get through the website at craftyattic.com, and there are many other projects for you to have a go at. So I hope you enjoyed watching this video. I hope you have a crack at silk ribbon embroidery, because it's a great deal of fun, and thank you for watching.